Again, I want to welcome all of you here, echoing Joe Nye's remarks here in the beginning, that we're delighted to have so many members of the faculty and to have so many Wexner Fellows here and others from the community to join us for this occasion. It's one we've been looking forward to, and we thank you, Les Wexner, for being here. As Joe Nye said, Les and Abigail Wexner have become two of the most important supporters of the Kennedy School in the history of this institution. Their support, starting back some 14, 15 years ago for the Wexner Fellows Program. We've had both the Israeli Fellows Program and the Graduate Fellows Program that have been so successful, and so many members here of the faculty have been engaged in Les. It's good to see some of them here. Brian Mandel has been deeply engaged in it, and John White has been deeply engaged with this, and Pete Zimmerman and Ron Heifetz and others. And then, of course, more recently, your support of the Center for Public Leadership has been something for which we've been deeply grateful as well. And there are others here, Barbara Kellerman, especially Ron Heifetz, who was a major figure in marrying us up. We thank you for that. And as we said, Les, in inviting you here today, we've had the occasion since the time the center opened to conduct a number of conversations about leadership with people in both the public sector and the private sector. We've recorded those. They've become part of our archives. They are then made available to those who wish to use them in classrooms. They're going to become part of our website. They're part of our general outreach effort, and obviously a part of our effort to understand leadership more fully than we do. And we've had Nobel Peace Prize winners who have participated in this. We've former senators, prime ministers, cabinet officers, people from NGOs and corporate CEOs, and who have been here. Lou Gerstner was here a few months ago when he completed his book and was well received, and I think helped people from a school of government understand leadership from other perspectives, and that's why we're also grateful that you could join us. So let's talk for a little bit about that, and let me introduce you a little more formally to the group, and then I want to ask you how you made all this possible. I mean, how you built this company. It was some 40 years ago that Les opened a single store in Columbus, Ohio. Sales of $160,000 that first year. Now Limited Brands is some 5,000 stores altogether. And sales in the year 2002, some $9 billion. Not a bad growth rate. And it's very interesting to me that even as they have undergone serious restructuring in the last 2 or 3 years, it's heavily competitive. The retail industry is very heavily competitive, and Les has had to adjust and move his company. And Len Schlesinger, who was here on the faculty at the business school and has been deeply connected to the business school, to the Kennedy School, went to join him as part of this effort. But even as they've gone through this restructuring, which has not been easy, that Fortune recently conducted a survey of the most admired companies by field, and in specialty retailing, Limited Brands right up on top in terms of admiration. And that's an interesting story in of itself. As this company has grown, Les Wexner has increasingly devoted himself to community and philanthropy, and has become deeply woven into who he is as an individual. And when he and Abigail were married 10 years ago, and she came out from practicing law in New York, where she was the major law firm there, she came to Columbus. They've had 4 children since then. Mother's Day yesterday apparently was a wild scramble in the Wexner household in New Albany. Just as Les had, Abigail has become deeply engaged in community commitments. She's very, very involved in United Way. She has spent a great deal of her time now working with battered women and disadvantaged children, and has created an organization in Ohio that's rapidly becoming the leading children's advocacy group in the state of Ohio, and she's been engaged in many other activities. But Abigail, why don't you stand so everybody can see you, please? I think when Ron and Suzanne Heifetz and I went out for your birthday some time ago, it was really interesting to us how the people of Columbus had found, wow, she sort of parachuted in here. Suddenly she's the community leader organizing this and that. United Way is like 7th or 8th biggest in the country now. It's been interesting to watch. And the person who worked with her to get a lot of this done was Les. So what I'd like to do is talk for a little bit, Les, and then open this up for conversation. We have a couple of cameras here we're recording it with. And I want to ask you, 40 years, what was the secret to building this business? How did you do it?
Well, I think my career probably has gone through about 3 different evolutions. Initially, I just wanted to make a living, so opening a store then my lifetime ambition was to be able to make $15,000 a year and have a new car every 3 years. So I had a very concrete set of goals. And then things got screwed up, and I opened a second store, and a third, and a fourth, and a 10th, and a 40th, and a 50th, and the business group began to grow quite rapidly.
Things got screwed up.
Things got screwed up.
Some of us would like to have this kind of screw up now.
But it was that first phase was probably a classic entrepreneur with a vision, and pursuing that vision one store at a time, just relentlessly refining and perfecting a thought. The second phase of the growth of the business was seeing if we could replicate that pattern, so becoming a multi-division company. How many different businesses could we run using the same, if you would, kind of formula? So it led to creating businesses like Express, like Victoria's Secret, like Bath and Body Works, and some other businesses. And by the early 90s, what I, in hindsight, recognized that second phase had ended, and we'd created what I thought was a multi-division company, and I think really we were a very poorly organized venture capital company. And what I imagined for all the leaders of the businesses that comprised the business, that I wanted all of them to have the same amount of flexibility and, if you would, entrepreneurial opportunities. And we reveled in that freedom. So if one business wanted to have a compact computer and another wanted to have a Dell system and somebody else wanted an IBM and somebody else didn't want any, those were great signs of individuality and people exercising their entrepreneurial attitudes. But the business was stalled, and the tough decision that I had to make in the early 90s was to change the business, really undertake a major change initiative, change the format, change the organization. And as I began thinking through that, what I began to realize, which was the hardest part, was I'd probably have to change some of the people. And one of the people could have been me, because very often as enterprises and institutions evolve, the founder and even the mid-career person can't affect the change. And we've got through it. As you mentioned, Len Schlesinger left the business school and eventually ended up in Columbus and is the vice chair of the company. And I used Len as a consultant. And, I think it must have been 3 or 4 years after I began the change process, which he framed but didn't encourage. That is, he said you could do this or you could do that, but if you really are serious about changing, the ripple effects will be substantial. And I thought about them, and one Saturday I met with Len and I said, I've decided to bite the bullet. I want to reorganize the business. And I recognize I'm now going into the wilderness. Having built it and structure it as I wanted it to be, now I had to completely rethink it, which meant rethinking the basic premises, which I think is an important leadership lesson, that you have, if you would, guiding principles, and they work for a 30-year period. I mean, screwing up very badly, opening 5,000 stores and creating a $9 billion business. And then you pause, and the metaphor I use is it's as if after 30 years, one day God taps me on the shoulder and says, well, you know, you've played professional football your whole life quite successfully, and now it's golf. And it's, I wasn't planning on becoming a professional golfer. Well, it's like either that or retire. So I really had to think through what I did personally, how I led the business, and the structure of the business. So that dynamic change process was quite significant. So one Saturday, I meet with Len. I tell him I'm ready to bite the bullet. He says, okay, I'll help you. He said, because this is going to be very difficult. And 4 or 5 years later, I think it was over a cup of tea one night, he said, you know, he said, I was really conflicted when I gave you this direction. And he said, I spent a lot of time talking with my wife, that is his wife, Phyllis, who's also a psychologist. And he said, I was very conflicted because the probability of you leading such a change and emerging successfully, he said, I thought was 1 in 1,000. And I said, well, and he said, my conflict was to tell you that you could go off the deep end. And I said, well, why didn't you? He said, well, because you couldn't have worked harder, you couldn't have been more sincere in wanting to do this. And I felt if I told you that the odds were so bad, he said, I thought it would have just crippled you. And he said, so I just held back. And he said, like, miraculously you were able to do it. So the summary is, I think there was an entrepreneurial phase, a phase of very rapid growth. Probably the greatest learning was in the reappraising. And as I told you before, we end the year, last year, with $9 billion in sales, virtually no debt, $2 billion in cash, and surprisingly, Fortune ranks us the most admired company in our industry. So as I look back at that adventure, you know, we kind of lucked out. But it was probably the greatest learning of my life, having to undo and rethink the basic principles.
As a reflective practitioner, and how did you make that change? What did you learn about restructuring? I mean, this comes home very closely to a lot of us here. As we look around, you had all these divisions. We have a lot of centers at tennis school, and we're trying to figure out how to make the whole enterprise, you know, come together in ways that we can work with each other, gain leverage from each other. How did you go through that process to make that work? What did you learn about that? What it took?
Well, I think it's probably was pretty classic that in hindsight, it required an enormous amount of personal courage. I wouldn't have described it that way as I began, but as I look back, it was iron-ass determination and courage. And at some times, and I think the leader that has that different vision, it's a very lonely world. And I would meet with, if you would, my direct reports, maybe they're the equivalency of department heads, and say, I have this new vision of what the world can be. And initially everybody said, no, it can't be that way. And I just was relentless. And then I got yes to death, so I got slow walked. Everybody said, well, if that's how you want the world to be, then we're right with you, and not a damn thing happened. And
You've been there before, Joe, right?
and so then I had to say to myself, okay, I really mean it. Now something is going to happen, and who'd like to be the first person to walk the plank? And again, sitting around a table at a meeting, just putting it out in those words. And a lot of heads went down. And sure enough, there was a meeting, in the John, and somebody volunteered to walk the plank. They tested my, I believe you're saying it. I believe you believe you're saying it, but I don't believe you've got the guts to fire me. Yeah, I do.
So how many did you let go?
Over a period of 3 years, probably of the top 20 leaders, 2/3, which is classic in change management. About 1/3, this is probably very much stuff that you know, but in any significant change, not incremental change, but quantum change, about 1/3 of the people don't get it. and don't want it. The next third get it and may not be able to accommodate the change. And the bottom third say they're willing to give it or the next third say they're willing to give it a try. And I read something about change management, a couple or three books, and I said, well, I can believe that there will be some fatalities, but in my group, clearly, it won't be a mortality of almost 2/3. And month by month, more people either voluntarily or but definitively either opted out or just said, I can't do this, I can't affect this. And we began systematically repopulating the business. So the lessons are about the vision of the leader, determination that the leader's willing to pay the price, being clear about the vision. Hopefully in a quantum change, the vision you have is significant and proves itself, and then it's cascading that vision to 1, 2, 5, 10 people and bringing them along into that new vision. But obviously everybody knows the world will change. Nobody thinks their world should change. And the problem that I had probably as the dean would have or President Summers would have, it's very difficult to get eagles to fly in formation. And that's just how I thought about it. And, I'd come home regularly and lament to Abigail, I just can't believe it. The merit of the idea, people are yesing me, and then they're going to the John and having meetings and working around it, and they don't believe how serious I am. And I think I made the right decisions, and as a leader there was a triage, if you would, that I was making because I knew I was disrupting people's lives. Many of them had spent 10 or 20 years in the enterprise. As a public company, not unlike public service, you have responsibility to stakeholders inside and outside the enterprise. And I had to make judgments about all those stakeholders, investors, and that us not changing, I thought, would lead the enterprise to fail. And so you have individual responsibilities, friendships, and I think I'm intensely loyal and very, very patient. But at the end of the day, the group sorted themselves out into thirds, and it was quite painful, but quite significant in terms of the outcome.
Cash may want to come back when we get to the questions or others about this. Due to the time, I want to shift a little because there's so many issues to cover. As you have evolved, your sense of leadership has also evolved so that you now have a sense of what of a leader is a whole person. That's fundamental. It's interesting. This is almost a continuation of a conversation over in Larry Summers' office that went on for more than an hour about what are the qualities of a good leader that Larry really wanted to pursue. So tell us about your thoughts about the whole person and how important that is, a whole leader.
Well, I formulated it. I think I reformulate it about every couple or 3 years. But my latest thinking, and at least the way I talk to myself about it, is that I believe in the concept of the complete leader. And I try to teach that, if you would, and lobby it inside our enterprise and inside our community, whether it's the American Jewish community or the Columbus community or United Way or whatever our interests are. And fundamentally, I believe a leader has to know his stuff. So that, if you would, that's kind of the beginning, because if you don't know your stuff, then you're going to be a very goofy leader. But and I thought that when I had the first store, that I had to know my stuff, otherwise I would go broke. When I had 2 stores, I had to know a little bit more stuff, but I had to know that stuff, and I wanted to teach the things or share the knowledge and the experience that I had with others. What I've evolved my thinking to today is that there's really 3 parts. A complete leader is a whole person, which is one part. I think the second part is a complete leader is a teacher in the fullest sense. And the third part is the complete leader is a catalyst for change. And what I mean by that, that whole person is, at some level, I think it's very important that everybody, and we discussed this with Larry Summers, I think everybody should have a wholesome interest in their own career. I think everybody should have a whole life, whether it's playing golf or tennis or family and friends, so that there's a dimension that takes them out of the workaholic kind of beast of burden kind of person. I think the third part, which began crystallizing probably about 20 years ago for me, was that you have to have a sense of community. And because if you think about work-life balance, you're on one continuum, which is all about you. You know, the better I do, the more golf I get to play, or the better I do, the better life my family can live. And I think those things are healthy, but I think a whole person is more trusted. And in the business, we've gotten very explicit about community involvement. It's not an elective. And the community, the only part of this elective is pick your interest. If it's your church, if it's your synagogue, if it's United Way, if it's your college, if it's a hospital, but you have to be significantly involved.
So somebody comes and you're thinking about hiring them as an executive, and you talk about, what do you know, and then what's your life like, but you also, you want to talk to them about whether they're whole, about their lives, and about whether they are involved in community already.
Yeah. And there's a tough thing, because you imagine when you formulate this idea and say, now I'm going to interview something. It's imagine you're recruiting a faculty member from Princeton or Yale, and you say, like, you know your stuff, and we really value you and your compensation, psychic and otherwise. We'd like to know that you live a whole life and you have interests. But before you come to the Kennedy School, we'd like to know what your community interests are and that you really work them, because that matters to us sincerely, that you're a whole person. And so imagine that in a business context, recruiting somebody, a senior executive from one of our competitors, and saying, well, we'll match your salary, we'll increase your salary, and here's the extra benefits. And do you have any hobbies or community interests? What do you do with your family? And then saying, we really value community involvement. So what do you do? And because if you choose to come with us, you're going to have to do something, and it'll be more than write a check. But you ought to think about this. So it isn't, and they're not honorariums. We want you to really reach out in the community, because we trust leaders that are whole people and that are balanced. And if you have leadership skills, you should want to exercise those skills and practice those skills at Children's Hospital, at the Coalition Against Family Violence, for United Way. But you have to have that balance. And it's become a powerful recruiting tool, and I think a part of our reputational capital has come from us saying it and really doing it. When new executives begin an onboarding process, which is the first of a couple-day meetings, and this is about what we do and how we do and the history of the company, we've amended the previous practice, and now it begins with a half day of community service. And we just had a new onboarding for senior executives last week, and I spoke to them, but it was after they'd spent a half day at an alcohol and drug abuse center working with people who were working their way back into society. Very powerful, because then you say, we really value involvement, and you must, because the first encounter with the business, after signing up for a paycheck, was to go out into the community and do something. So you guys must really mean it.
When you had dinner with Joe, Holly, and Abigail in Ohio last summer, you said that you had actually made a canvas of the top 250 people in your company who were in the rising ranks, and that you went to each one of them asking what their community involvement was, And if they weren't on a nonprofit board, you helped them get onto a nonprofit board. If you thought that was part of their, what they need to do as part of their growth within Limited.
Yes, and if you say that and you really mean it,
Yeah.
because it would be very easy for people, I think, to feel good about the enterprise or feel good about me as the leader, knowing that I support the Kennedy School or I support United Way. I'd say you can't borrow that from me. You can feel good about it, but it doesn't help you. You have to do something. And literally somebody in the enterprise, if you would, manages outreach for those 250. Like, what are you doing? Are you happy? What is your interest? Do you go to meetings? And then, and are you contributing? So it isn't an honorarium. What do you learn?
And you also made the argument that it was not simply being caring about the community, but it also served the purpose of the company.
Oh, yeah. I think it's, well, if you're a leader, if you like to organize, if you like to lead, in any capacity, then it's fun, if you would, and it's kind of a self-improvement course to work these things out in other venues. So whether it's listening skills or how you influence a group. Bob Milbourne is here, who is the professional leader of the Columbus Partnership, which is a group of 16 CEOs. And the 16 CEOs picked me as the leader. So I think my inauguration speech was, I have no authority. You're all here voluntarily. Your interest is the community. I'm going to try to lead you, but understand I can only influence you. And I'm very sensitive to the fact that you're all presidents. Some of you are presidents of businesses larger than ours, so we have a disparity of interests, but I can only lead from influence. So the notion of an influence model, an authority model, listening skills, organizational skills, visioning, agenda skills, the things that leaders want to practice as they're practicing their art and their science. I think it's a wonderful thing to try these things in communities, let alone your particular skill set. So if you're a marketing executive helping a hospital market, or if you're a financial executive, really getting into the budget and the audit of a museum, that you can apply your, if you had technical skills and your leadership and organizational abilities. And I think it makes you, it enriches your career and advances it.
And how does it change the company itself in terms of the values within the company?
Well, I think when a lot is discussed about business ethics and Sarbanes-Oxley and other issues of ethics and values, at one level, if I were an investor in an enterprise, I would trust our enterprise because there's at least 250 people that are walking the walk and talking the talk and are demonstrating that they have ethical judgments, they have a moral compass, that they are balanced individuals. In concrete ways, our Business United Way campaign is on a per capita basis in New York, and our offices in Kettering, Ohio, in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, and in New York City have the highest per capita giving to United Way in all of those communities. New York is an astonishing one, that on a per capita basis we could do so well. And then how the communities advance. I think the soft measure is all leaders run the risk of making bad decisions. I mean, you know that you're not divinely inspired, and if you are divinely inspired, then perhaps you ignore the divine at some times and make human error. I find it is much easier for people to accept errors in judgment, mine or our collective judgments, when they know that we're coming from a position of values. That they might question the judgment, but they know ethically we think things through. And I think that has an enormous benefit in retention. I don't think not nearly as much time, hopefully very little time, is wasted wondering why the leaders are making decisions from a values base. It's like, I wonder if they've, I wonder if they're good people or if they're selfishly motivated. I think there's virtually none of that in an organization, and I think that that's healthy. I also think the question comes up at a lot of levels of leadership: are we doing the right thing? Let's think about this from an ethical, moral point of view, and then.
Oh, that final question, I'd like to open this up, the time we have. What do you tell yourself about how some American corporations have gone so badly off track here in recent years? How do you think about it? Because you're CEO of this large, very successful enterprise, and you see some of your colleagues who have gone so badly wrong.
Well, I think the incentive in business is pretty simple. The better you do, you run up the score, and that's measured in dollars. And I think that the leadership of businesses and business schools would be better served by talking about ethics and morals and values, and insisting at entry level people are asked to do the right thing, community service, and moral judgments are put forward. And clearly, leaders do lead. So when there's an example of somebody giving of their treasure or their time for community, and they're doing those things are done in a thoughtful way, I think that is healthy for the organization. I have been, before it was popular to be critical of businesses that gave away shareholders' money. I'd say, well, they're a wonderful company. Look at all the money they give away. And I'd say, well, wait, they're giving away other people's money. How do the officers behave? Are they giving away their money? Or are they giving of their time? As an enterprise, are they really active in the community, or have they delegated this to the community good department? And so I look at, in the world as I look at it, say if you say you run up the score by how well you do, it's okay to avoid taxes, but you maybe not evade them, so that you're skating on a thin line, and there's no balance that says we think about responsibilities to our communities. So I don't want to make this sound holier than anyone, but in our community, as other businesses, we're very concerned about public education, and but we've allowed and organized for people in the business at all levels, part-timers, hourly workers, senior officers, to volunteer to tutor in the Columbus public school systems. In the last 2 years, I think we've tutored more than 40,000 hours. So people take off time during the workday and go tutor. It's like they come back enriched. The written messages and emails that I get, this is the best, if you would, benefit the company has to offer. It's better than healthcare. And at every level, I get messages about, you do the right thing, you enable us to do the right thing. So that
If they think it's better for them, their mental health.
Oh, yes, their mental health, and they trust the morality. Now, I believe that at all levels, when you have that kind of thinking, that if somebody is abusing the customer, abusing the investor, that somebody blows the whistle, because we're in very practical ways and at as many levels as possible walking a moral walk, and we're talking it and encouraging it and say we value it. So I think the notion of oversight, whether it's audit committees or Sarbanes-Oxley or SECs, how high you make the wall, I think probably enterprises, public corporations, kind of deserve what they get. But I don't think they had to get that. They had to get to this point. I think that there should have been something in business school education that says, be more balanced, think about this. It will be better for your business. It'll be better for society. But it will be in the enterprise's selfish interest, own selfish interest. And it was interesting because we raised this issue with President Summers and said, I know that Harvard always gets sideways with the greater Boston community about where you're going to build buildings and all these things. Think about it for a moment. What if every every faculty member and every student had to tutor a child in the Boston public school system 2 hours a week. Think about the political capital and goodwill that would be in the community for this institution, or paint fences, or however it's expressed, but tangible expressions. Would they see you as separated, or would they see you partnered in the broader community interest? So I'd spend the money on tutoring and not on lawyers.
So interesting. Well, we invite you. We invite you to come figure out how to make 10,000 eagles fly in formation.
Well, I'm working on 20, but
Why don't we open this up to a conversation? You can identify yourself.
Richard Parker, I teach at the Shorenstein Center. The global production of clothing, like textiles, has been the subject of great debate, particularly subjects like Nike's productions of shoes, but it runs the gamut. Would you talk a little bit about your leadership or Limited's leadership in trying to make sure that working conditions, environmental conditions, and the like are being met in the acquisition? I assume you don't operate your own plants overseas, but some companies have taken significant leadership, like Levi's. Where is the Limited in all of this?
well, I think we're at the top of the heap. If not, we're competing to provide the best moral leadership. As you probably well know, this is a battle that we can't win and nobody can win in an absolute way. The notion of setting standards of age, of working conditions, having inspectors around the world, hundreds of people visiting factories, auditing factory records to make sure that power consumption equals output, so that what we're seeing in the factory that's producing our merchandise isn't being slid in from other sites. I mean, as rigorous as we can be, hiring third-party auditors to make sure that everything is to, if you would, the highest ethical standard. And I think we constantly challenge ourselves, say, is there more that we could do? And occasionally we figure out more and better ways, but it's a very difficult thing, as you can imagine. When the needle skills, things that produce shoes and apparel, those jobs and those industries, migrate to places where wages are low. Cultural differences are quite substantial than ours, but we build that wall as high as we can.
Did you have a follow-up, Richard?
I was just hoping for some examples, because I know it's a field where there have been debates about the means of enforcement, the criteria for enforcement, whether it should be voluntary within the industry, whether outsiders, including states or NGOs, should become involved as the auditors of the process. And I was interested just a little more to hear your thoughts and perhaps some examples of criteria. Are there certain countries that you won't acquire goods from because of human rights policies? How do you develop those policies? Just trying to get some flesh on this.
Yeah. We do that. We've also, in a positive way, tried to provide leadership for sub-Saharan Africa, teaching skills, how to run factories, factory standards, ask entrepreneurs and factory owners from other countries to go there and show, take entrepreneurs and factory owners from sub-Saharan Africa, show them factories that meet standards, how they can run, practical things. Yeah. So we're tough about it.
We have some great leaders come to the Kennedy School from the public sector. They're people who won the Innovation in American Government Award. And usually in talking to the students about what they've done, there was some moment in their leadership where they understood the world differently, where they got a new insight on the world, and then, of course, they had to have the courage and the leadership ability to follow through on that. What was it about the retail world 10, 11, 12 years ago, whenever you realized that you had to change? What was it that you realized had changed that meant that you had to leave your company in a different way, even if that meant maybe not even with you? What was the change in your world?
Well, the retail wheel is always turning, and I think there have been changes in the last 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years. I think the most significant part was the internal piece. It wasn't competitive. The most significant piece was recognizing that we had organized. I had created a business and set up an organizational structure that was not functional, and that it did function very successfully for about a decade, and that I had to challenge that. The environmental piece that happened was important, but not that important. And 20 years ago, fashion specialty businesses could be stores, and clearly there was a shift to brands, where the most successful stores were perceived of as brands, whether they were created by designers or created by retailers. And that was in parallel. But the significant part was just rethinking the organization that I'd structured as a leader.
Dean Williams from the Centre for Public Leadership. What's the most significant leadership challenge you're facing right now, given the growth of the company, the success of the company, and the direction it could be heading? What is it that keeps you up at night, that you're wrestling with right now?
Well, at this point in my young life, I wonder how I've really done in terms of, is the success of the enterprise a function of me, or have we created a culture and a pattern and ideas that go beyond a generation? Within that, what I began thinking about probably about 5 years ago was I like to teach, but the way I was taught was kind of as an apprentice watching a master, just observing how others had worked. And what I began to think about and have made some progress with is, thus comes part of my leadership model, is that leaders have to be teachers. And the aspects of it, like I think good teachers do know their subject. Good teachers care about their students. The students know the teacher does care. The teacher has a teachable point of view and does teach. So I've not been trained as a teacher, but I've been coached recently in about teaching. So to develop lesson plans, I budget about 150 hours a year of teaching. Not watch me do, but classes of 3, 6, 10, 12 people, generally 2 to 3 hour classes, homework, and what it's forced me to do is to think about what I do from a teachable point of view. The way I'd thought about it was, like I'm a tennis pro and I really hit the ball well, just watch me. Very different to break that down and be able to actually teach somebody. And there's a couple teachers, if you would, in the enterprise that are coaching me to see myself as a teacher. So I think the challenge is sustainability. There's a question of the structure, if you would, the architecture of the business. But I think the challenge that I have is thinking about things in teachable points of view, demonstrating that I can, and then teaching others to teach, which in a business atmosphere is quite different.
Let me go over this again. You, as chairman of the company, spend 100 to 150 hours teaching others, mostly within your company. Our academic dean, Steve Wall, probably give you fully 100 points here within the Kennedy School. For the responsibility of a faculty member to do that much, you actually spend 100 to 150 hours of your own time teaching who? People who work for you, executives coming up, people outside the company, and what do you teach?
Well, I begin with high potentials. I teach leadership. I teach merchandising. I teach marketing, things that I think I know about. The divisional presidents and other leaders suggest people for class, if you would, graduate students. And it's a lot of time. Say it's nominally 3 or 4 hours a week, but there's probably another equal amount of time in the preparation, because one of the things I learned about teaching is I can ramble for an hour, but having a lesson plan and really getting to a teachable point of view, what is the essence of it? This is what I'm going to teach you. Let me break it down for you. Let me give you a case study. Let me give you homework to see. I mean, it's real teaching, not just trying to communicate, but I did not go to teaching school. And it's, but I really do it. I'm a big evangelist of leaders have to see themselves as teachers, not just with the willingness to share, but again, teachable points of view. And it's, as a novice practitioner, it's petrifying. Because just to say, well, talk to people about how to buy sweaters, or talk to people about leadership or values-based leadership, that's kind of easy. You say, now make a lesson plan for this, and think about how you're going to interact, and you're going to teach and ask questions and give people homework, and they're going to come back, and very interesting revelation. And I think it levers me because, again, a successful leader only gets leverage by the scope and scale that he can influence others. So if you can only learn what I do by watching and then interpreting it, I think I did not have a teaching model. So I'm quite challenged by thinking about it really as a teacher in the fullest sense of at least the fullest sense to me. One of the students has a question.
Les, you once mentioned that leadership in a basketball team was a metaphor that you found useful. In what ways does running a large organization, in what ways is that analogous to leadership in basketball?
Well, what I found myself in the business, answering the dean's question about leadership, I like to think and communicate in analogies. So he'd say, we win together. This is like a team, and we have to really function like a team, and we have to have a great team effort. And everybody would say yes. I mean, this for years people would say yes, because it's kind of an inspiring thing to imagine a team, and whatever coach was popular or team was winning, and say we can be a team and we can win like this, or we could win like Michael Jordan in Chicago, or we could win like the Green Bay Packers. And what I recognize that there's different kinds of teams. And so a football team, which if that's the way you think about teaming, the quarterback calls all the plays, handles the ball every time, and people have very specific assignments. A baseball team is substantially the same. A basketball team is different. There's a playmaker. It moves much faster, and everybody handles the ball. And the model that I evangelize in our enterprise, because I think it matches the business we're in. The fashion business moves very fast, and a lot of people have to make decisions. And we have to team up, and we have to partner up. And there is a coach, there is a playmaker, there are defined positions, if you would, responsibilities. But I'd like people to see it as a basketball team, that fast-moving, that interactive, that anyone can score. So I think it's useful in our enterprise when we talk about teaming to be specific about what we're referencing. And we've actually made a movie where we've used some swipes from the NBA to demonstrate speed and agility and the fact that anybody can score. And then you show that next to clips from a baseball where it's painfully slow, and the catcher's going out to the mound to get the signal and then goes back and gets the signal again. Doesn't resemble basketball at all. But that's my mental model for team.
Rabbi, closing up, please.
Hi, I'm Sasha Littman. I'm one of your graduate fellows, so thank you for the investment. I'm finishing my degree right now here at the Kennedy School, and I had a question for you regarding some of your involvement with the Jewish community specifically, and was wondering, with the organized Jewish community, what kind of changes do you see the organized Jewish community needing to go through in the next several years, paralleling your experiences in your business life?
Well, I think I've thought about that a lot, and the American Jewish community was very much organized on a model that responded to the tragedies of the Holocaust and World War II. So it was largely organized about rescue and resettlement, support and establishment of the State of Israel. And those were, and it was led largely by marketers, if you would, guys like me that could raise money and organize fundraising because that was the priority. And I think it is struggling because it doesn't have a vision that's relevant into the future. So that vision, which was very powerful in 1948, 58, 68, and 78, becomes less relevant in 2008. In 2048, it'll be 100 years old. So what I tell my friends that worry about Jewish community life is that the relevance of the Holocaust and World War II as the issue that catalyzes and coalesces the action of the community is about the same relevance to my kids as the American Civil War was to me. It's just something that was long in the past, and it doesn't really express current problems. And in the theory of change, I think the community has to come together and have a compelling vision of the future. So, and fixing things that are broken or dysfunctional is probably a worthwhile thing because broken things need to be fixed. But getting bright people together and say, what is the vision of the community go forward? Is it about outreach? Is it about education? Is it about community institutions? Is there a different balance between support for Israel and support for American Jewish institutions or other world institutions? And I've been trying to lead that argument, or lead that discussion, and get people engaged that just going back to the 1968 model and trying to relive it and repair it will be chaotic. So, I have very specific ideas about what that vision should be, but I think again, you got to get the eagles to fly in formation and really say, do we have a problem? Do we need to change? Is there a clear vision of the future? And I've had mixed results in people engaging because when you begin a change process, the first thing that happens is people say, "What the hell's the problem?" We're not doing as well as we used to, but there's no real need for change. What we got to do is just fix a few things and get them back to the way they were. But I think I think it's a good question, and that it demonstrates how I think about leaders' roles. And I think the essence of it is a clear and compelling vision. And repair isn't compelling, and it just doesn't move men's and women's souls. Thank you, David.
Les,
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you. I want to say we're grateful to you today, not only for coming and speaking here, and we'll look forward to a continuing conversation as your views continue to evolve. But I want to say to you personally that how grateful I am. I think all of us here are at school that, and partnering with the county school, you're bringing to us not only financial support, but we welcome the fact that you are as committed to being engaged with the process, with the growth of the enterprises here, that you bring to it a very deeply anchored set of belief in values-based leadership, and that you bring to it a moral compass. I think that from our perspective, to have you with us as a partner with the kind of values you represent, and you and Abigail represent, it just makes our effort here so much, I think, more satisfying and allows us to have a sense of real growth and possibility. So we thank you for that very much. Thank you. Thank you. And again, I want to welcome all of you here, echoing Joe Nye's remarks here in the beginning, that we're delighted to have so many members of the faculty and to have so many Wexner Fellows here and others from the community to join us for this occasion. It's one we've been looking forward to, and we thank you, Les Wexner, for being here. As Joe Nye said, Les and Abigail Wexner have become two of the most important supporters of the Kennedy School in the history of this institution. Their support, starting back some 14, 15 years ago for the Wexner Fellows Program. We've had both the Israeli Fellows Program and the Graduate Fellows Program that have been so successful, and so many members here of the faculty have been engaged in Les. It's good to see some of them here. Brian Mandel's been deeply engaged in it, and John White has been deeply engaged with this, and Pete Zimmerman and Ron Heifetz and others. And then, of course, more recently, your support of the Center for Public Leadership has been something for which we've been deeply grateful as well. And there are others here, Barbara Kellerman, especially Ron Heifetz, who was a major figure. And then I want to ask you how you made all this possible. I mean, how you built this company. It was some 40 years ago that Les opened a single store in Columbus, Ohio. Sales of $160,000 that first year. Now Limited Brands is some 5,000 stores altogether. And sales in the year 2002, some $9 billion. Not a bad growth rate. And it's very interesting to me that even as they have undergone serious restructuring in the last 2 or 3 years, it's a heavily competitive, the retail industry is very heavily competitive. And Les has had to adjust and move his company. And Len Schlesinger, who was here on the faculty at the business school and has been deeply connected to the business school, to the Kennedy School, went to join him as part of this effort. But even as they've gone through this restructuring, which has not been easy, that Fortune recently conducted a survey of the most admired companies by field, and in specialty retailing, Limited Brands right up on top in terms of admiration. And that's an interesting story in of itself. As this company has grown, Les Wexner has increasingly devoted himself to community and philanthropy, and he's become deeply woven into who he is as an individual. And when he and Abigail were married 10 years ago, and she came out from practicing law in New York, where she was the major law firm there, she came to Columbus. They've had 4 children since then. Mother's Day yesterday apparently was a wild scramble in the Wexner household in New Albany. Just as Les has, Abigail has become deeply engaged in community commitments. She's very, very involved in the United Way. She has spent a great deal of her time now working with battered women and disadvantaged children, and has created an organization in Ohio that's rapidly becoming the leading children's advocacy group in the state of Ohio, and she's been engaged in many other activities. But Abigail, why don't you stand so everybody can see you, please? I think when Ron and Suzanne Heifetz and I went out for your birthday some time ago, it was really interesting to us how the people of Columbus had found, wow, she's sort of, and marrying us up, we thank you for that. And as we said, Les, in inviting you here today, we've had the occasion since the time the center opened to conduct a number of conversations about leadership with people in both the public sector and the private sector. We've recorded those. They've become part of our archives. They are then made available to those who wish to use them in classrooms. They're going to become part of our website. They're part of our general outreach effort, and obviously a part of our effort to understand leadership more fully than we do. And we've had Nobel Peace Prize winners who have participated in this. We former senators, prime ministers, cabinet officers, people from from NGOs and corporate CEOs and who have been here. Lou Gerstner was here a few months ago when he completed his book and was well received, and I think helped people from a school of government understand leadership from other perspectives, and that's why we're also grateful that you could join us. So let's talk for a little bit about that, and let me introduce you a little more formally to the group. And parachuted in here, suddenly she's the community leader organizing this and that. United Way is like 7th or 8th biggest in the country now. It's been interesting to watch. And the person who worked with her to get a lot of this done was Les. So what I'd like to do is talk for a little bit, Les, and then open this up for conversation. We have a couple of cameras here we're recording it with. And I want to ask you, 40 years, what was the secret to building this business? How did you do it?
Well, I think my career probably has gone through about 3 different evolutions. Initially, I just wanted to make a living, so opening a store with then my lifetime ambition was to be able to make $15,000 a year and have a new car every 3 years. So I had a very concrete set of goals. And then things got screwed up, and I opened a second store, and a third, and a fourth, and a 10th, and a 40th, and a 50th, and the business group began to grow quite rapidly.
Things got screwed up.
Things got screwed up.
Some of us would like to have those kind of screw-ups now.
But it was that first phase was probably a classic entrepreneur with a vision, and pursuing that vision one store at a time, just relentlessly refining and perfecting a thought. The second phase of the growth of the business